If you've been selling on Amazon for a while, you've probably had this experience before. You spend hours inside PPC, adjusting bids, tweaking keywords, changing match types, pausing things that don't look profitable, and then a week later, your performance barely changes, or actually it gets worse. And honestly, after scaling my own Amazon brand past $6 million annually and working with more than 65 brands through my agency, Keystone Growth Partners, I can tell you something that most sellers eventually do realize is that a lot of PPC problems have very little to do with PPC itself. That's the part that most people miss. Amazon advertising has become a lot more competitive over the last few years. CPCs are higher, the platform is more crowded, and the old hack style PPC tactics that used to work a few years ago just don't move the needle anymore. So in this video, I want to walk you through how experienced Amazon operators actually analyze PPC in 2026, not just surface level optimizations like most agencies do, but how to actually identify the real bottlenecks holding your campaigns back, how to structure campaigns properly, and how to make decisions based on data instead of emotion. Because once you understand this framework, PPC becomes way less stressful and honestly a lot more predictable. And by the end of the video, you'll know exactly what to look for at first before touching your campaigns. So the first major mistake that I see is sellers assuming that PPC problems are always caused by bad bids or bad keywords. Now, sometimes that is true, but a lot of the time the issue starts much earlier in the funnel. So when I audit an account, I usually start with just 3 core metrics. Now, these 3 numbers tell you almost everything you need to know about where the actual problem exists. And those metrics are number 1, impressions, number 2, click-through rate, and number 3, conversion rate. And then the fourth, which is ACoS or TACoS, is usually not the root problem, but that is essentially the result of the problems happening upstream. So let's break this down properly. The first is impressions. Impressions are simply how often is Amazon even showing your ad, right? It sounds basic, but honestly, if impressions are low, nothing else matters. You can't optimize conversions on traffic that just doesn't exist. And usually low impressions comes down to a few things. First, the bids simply aren't competitive enough. So Amazon PPC is still an auction system, and if your bids are too low, Amazon either won't show your ads consistently or your ads end up buried so far down that nobody even sees them. The second could be targeting relevance. Sometimes sellers target keywords that are technically related to the product but don't actually match shopper intent very well. And over time, Amazon notices weak engagement signals. And when that happens, your impressions start drying up. And then the third could be budget limitations. Now, this is something that gets overlooked constantly. A lot of sellers don't notice that their campaigns actually run out of budget halfway through the day, and then Amazon stops serving ads entirely. So instead of just aggressively increasing your bids, always check whether delivery is simply getting throttled by budget caps. A lot of sellers miss that. The second stage of the funnel is click-through rate. Are shoppers really interested in your product? Now, let's say impressions are healthy. The next question actually becomes, are people actually clicking? Now, a low CDR usually means that shoppers are seeing your ad, but nothing about the listing is really compelling enough to earn the click. And honestly, most of the time, the issue when it comes to CTR comes down to 3 things. Number 1, poor targeting. Number 2, weak creative. And number 3, low trust signals. So if your ads are showing up for searches that really don't align with buyer intent, your CTR drops immediately. At the same time, if your main image is weak or your title is weak, and these problems are probably even more common, again, your CTR would drop. So your PPC campaign is only as strong as the listing that's attached to it. So if your product really blends into search results and nothing really stands out, shoppers will really just scroll past you without even clicking on you. And I see sellers trying to solve this with bid adjustments all the time. And that's really just a wrong approach, because at this stage of the funnel, the real issue is in creative positioning. Is your main image compelling enough? Is it disruptive enough? What you need to understand is that at the search results page, what a customer can really see about your listings are broadly just 3 things. The first and foremost, which is really the biggest attention grabber, is your main image. The second is the first 5 words of your title, especially on mobile. And number 3 is ratings and reviews. So in 2026, reviews matter more than ever. If competitors have stronger ratings, better review counts, or simply more trust built up, shoppers really hesitate before clicking on your listing. And PPC cannot fix that problem. PPC cannot fix a fundamental trust problem, and that's important to understand. So if your campaigns have a lower click-through rate, just increasing your bids or budgets is not the solution to that stage of the problem. Okay, so what happens after the click? This is where conversion rate really matters. And this is probably the area that sellers underestimate the most. If your shoppers are clicking but not buying, your problem usually isn't traffic, it's persuasion. Maybe the listing just doesn't communicate value clearly. Maybe the images don't answer buying objections. Maybe your pricing doesn't align with perceived value, or maybe the targeting is just attracting the wrong shopper entirely. And that's why scaling PPC too early becomes dangerous, because if your conversion rate is weak, increasing spend just magnifies the losses. What you need to understand is that Amazon PPC is literally pay per click, as opposed to Meta, where you're charged for impressions or just for your ad showing up. On Amazon, if your ad shows up and if you essentially have a poor click-through rate, that means that customers aren't clicking on your ad. It basically means that you're not being charged for the ad. So from a P&L perspective, you're not actually burning any dollars if a customer doesn't click on your ad. But if customers are clicking on your ad and you have a really high click-through rate and the same customers are not converting, which essentially means you have a low conversion rate, that's literally the worst thing that could happen from a P&L perspective, because you're just burning advertising dollars because you're getting charged for the clicks without meaningful sales happening. I see growing brands get stuck here all the time, and they focus heavily on traffic acquisition, thinking that changing bids or getting in more traffic would solve the problem. But they haven't really built a listing experience that converts consistently yet. So again, if there is a conversion problem, then adjusting bid rates, optimizing campaigns is not going to be the solution for you to grow sales. And lastly, ACoS. Now, let's talk about this metric which really everybody obsesses over. Whether it's ACoS or TACoS, I'm not going to get into the specifics, but it simply measures how much you spend on ads relative to the revenue being generated. But one of the biggest mistakes that sellers make is that treating ACoS as a universal number. There really is no perfect ACoS. The only thing that matters is whether your ACoS makes sense relative to your margins. So for example, if your product sells for $50 on Amazon and your real profit on that after Amazon deducts all of its fees is $20, right? Now, in that case, spending $10 to acquire a customer might actually make sense because it's profitable. But if your margin on that product is just $8 after Amazon deducts all its fees, now then the same advertising spend of $10 with the same ACoS suddenly becomes a loss for you. So context really matters, but what it's important to note is that ACoS is not an input metric. ACoS is not the starting point of your analysis. It is an output. It's a final output of everything that's actually happening earlier in the funnel. So this is not a metric that you should be obsessing over. Rather, you should be focusing on all of the line items that happen earlier in the funnel, which includes your targeting, your click-through rate, your conversion rate, your pricing, your listing quality, and your placement efficiency. That's why experienced operators don't panic every time ACoS fluctuates. It's important that we diagnose the funnel first and understand which part of the funnel does the problem really lie in. And if we address that, that's how ACoS would get fixed. Now, once the foundational metrics are healthy, the next thing that matters is campaign structure. And honestly, this is again an area where sellers unknowingly sabotage themselves. I've audited over 500 accounts. There'll be several times where I've opened accounts and I see one giant campaigns, 500 keywords stuffed into multiple ad groups, broad matches everywhere without enough negative targeting, overlapping targeting, there's no clear segmentation, and overall data is just very messy. And once performance signals start blending together like that, optimization becomes extremely difficult. Instead, campaigns should intentionally be separated based on purpose. For example, exact match core keywords targeting the heavy hitters in terms of search volumes in the category. You should have discovery campaigns, broad match research campaigns, product targeting campaigns, brand defense campaigns, ranking campaigns. Each campaign should really exist for a specific reason, because clean structure creates clean data. So each campaign should really exist for a very specific reason, and then a clean structure would create clean data, and that clean data would lead to better decisions. And that's really what scalable PPC really comes down to. So once campaigns are structured correctly, optimization becomes much, much simpler. Personally, one of the things that I look at is placement performance, especially top of search, because top of search traffic behaves very differently from product pages or rest of the page or rest of search traffic. So if top of search is performing profitably, I usually scale aggressively there first, not everywhere, just there. And that distinction really matters, because a common mistake most sellers make is increasing bids globally across the entire campaign, when in reality, only one placement is actually working well. And that's basically how ACoS gets destroyed, because you're taking a blanket approach instead of optimizing with precision. So what you should be doing is increase exposure where your performance is the strongest and reduce waste everywhere else. Then after that, I move into search term analysis. And this is actually where a lot of the real profit gets made. So here I'm looking for profitable search terms worth scaling, borderline terms worth testing further, and inefficient traffic that needs to be cut. And to be honest, patience matters here too. A lot of sellers optimize way too frequently. They react emotionally to 24 hours worth of data. But PPC works best when decisions are made on statistically meaningful trends, not just random daily fluctuations. So personally, I prefer evaluating changes over at least a 7 to a 10-day window, because that gives Amazon enough time to stabilize delivery of those campaigns and gives you much cleaner data. One thing I've noticed working with growing brands over the years is that at a certain point, PPC stops just being a marketing task. It essentially becomes an operational responsibility, because you're managing budgets, bids, inventory timing, tracking ranking, profitability, creatives, reporting, algorithm changes. And for founders who are doing anywhere between 50 to 300K a month, that eventually becomes overwhelming, because at that point, most likely you have 5 to 10 products at least, and your ad spend would be in the range of about $10,000. Right? That's where usually brands either build an experienced internal team, or they decide they want experienced operators handling the Amazon growth side, so they can focus on the business itself in terms of product development, customer service, and other strategic aspects. And honestly, that's a big part of what we help brands with at Keystone Growth Partners, not just running ads, but actually helping brands scale on Amazon in a much more structured and sustainable manner, so the founder can actually behave like a CEO and focus on strategic aspects while we own the entire Amazon growth trajectory for them. At the end of the day, successful PPC optimization isn't just about constantly touching campaigns, it's about understanding what the data is actually telling you. So once you learn how to diagnose problems properly, most optimization decisions become surprisingly straightforward. And that's when PPC starts feeling less reactive and much more strategic. So if you found this video helpful, make sure to subscribe, because I'll be posting a lot more in-depth videos breaking down what's actually working on Amazon right now. And if you ever want a second set of eyes on your account from someone who's actually built their own brand, there's a link below in the description where you can reach out to me or our team. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again on the next one.